Me too.
Our next reader tonight is B. Morrison, also known as Barbara Morrison. She is the author of a memoir, Innocent, Confessions of a Welfare Mother, and a poetry collection, Here at Last, with a second volume, Terrarium, scheduled for 2013. Barbara's award-winning work has been published in anthologies and magazines. She conducts writing workshops and speaks on women's and poverty-related issues. She's also the owner of a small press and speaks about publishing and marketing. She has maintained her Monday Morning Books blog since 2006 and tweets regularly about poetry at bmorrison9. For more information, please visit her website and blog. Please welcome B. Morrison.
Thank you, Deborah. So these days, I'm a successful engineer. But when I was 24, I was a very scared young woman. I had been abandoned by my husband, disowned by my parents. I had a 1-year-old, and I was pregnant. I found a temporary sanctuary working as a live-in housekeeper for a very nice family, but when they found out I was pregnant, they asked me to leave. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the memoir starting at that point. It was October by then when I realized I had to leave, and the darkness closed in early. The house was empty and silent, the family having gone out for the evening. There were no curtains in the window of our sitting room on the 3rd floor. I stood close to the window and looked at the small bright stars in the black sky so far away. With Jeremy absorbed in stacking and sorting blocks, I went over and sat at the table to count up my assets. I was 24 years old. I had an English degree, no money, a 15-month-old son, and another child on the way. There were 3 piles of paper next to my journal on the table. One pile consisted of the help wanted ads torn out of the paper and lists of other possible jobs. I had checked them out, but I had next to nothing to offer in the way of skills or experience. And even the factories didn't want to hire someone visibly pregnant. A second pile contained the brochures for daycare centers. Childcare for children under 3 was almost non-existent and cost the earth. Some individuals provided daycare for infants and kids under 3 in their homes, but they weren't licensed or inspected, and they charged a lot as well. The third pile, the most disorderly, slipping this way and that, were the old envelopes, napkins from Friendlies, and other stray pieces of paper on which I'd been scribbling budgets for weeks. Jeremy came over and crawled into my lap. I held him with my left hand, and with my right, moved the budget papers back away from his hands and spread them out. I'd been trying to make the numbers work, but looking at them now, it seemed clear that the salary I would have to make simply to pay for room and board and childcare was well out of my reach. With no alimony or child support, I would have to work 2 or 3 jobs just to survive. But who would watch the kids? I wanted to raise them myself, not dump them in some group home for 16 hours a day, even assuming I could find such a place. As I looked at the pile of much erased and rewritten budgets, I realized that with no job, no money, no child support, and looming medical bills for prenatal care and the new baby's birth, I had no choice but to go on welfare. A choiceless choice, as my friend Jill called it. I had fought against going on welfare for so long, trying to find a communal living situation or a stay-at-home job. The idea of taking handouts, asking for charity, made me cringe. But I didn't see any other way to provide for my children in the coming months. Welfare seemed to be the only door left open to me. And welfare was not an attractive option, even in 1974, even in Massachusetts, where the allotment was one of the best in the country. I had seen what it was like for my friend Jill. In return for food stamps and barely enough cash to pay rent on the cheapest apartment with minimal utilities, she was subject to surprise inspections from social workers who were entitled to criticize every aspect of her life. When she handed over food stamps at Stop and Shop, the other shoppers inspected the contents of her cart, ready to condemn anything frivolous. She often had to fight to keep her meager allotment from being cut at some administrator's whim. dependent on an office where social workers were told to act as if the money were coming out of their own pocket. As Jill sometimes cried in frustration, how bad do your choices have to be before welfare is your best choice? I felt so old, as if I'd lived 100 years already. I had only one bit of philosophy left, one motto to hold my life together. The kids come first. The kids come first. Every decision had to be based on what was right for the kids, Jeremy and this new baby. I was all they had. I raised my head. Darkness filled the corners of the room, beyond the feeble circle of light from the table lamp. I shivered and held Jeremy closer, crossing my arms over his tummy and pressing him back against me. He craned his head back to look at me with wide, surprised eyes. "It's all right, sweetheart," I said, and kissed his neck. "Everything's going to be okay." "Okay," Jeremy repeated as he patted and stroked my cheek with his small, square hand. We were like the babes in the wood, but I couldn't allow us to lie down and die. I had to be an adult, though I barely knew how, having relied on my husband's knowledge of the world since leaving school. The lives of 2 children depended on my making the right decisions. The October wind rattled the window, threatening our precarious refuge. I had the sense that a door had slammed shut behind me, and I was stepping out into the cold, setting off on a journey with no maps, without even knowing what my destination would look like. All I knew for sure was that I would never give up my babies. Now, I grew up in Roland Park. I went to a private school. I finished college. So this was kind of a new world for me to go on welfare. So this book is really, it's a coming of age story about learning to be an adult, learning how to be a parent, learning how to negotiate with the local biker gang and with landlords who burned down houses for the insurance money, and also how to deal with a crazy, crazy welfare system. For example, I had to have an apartment before I could apply. I couldn't share an apartment with someone else. So that meant I had to scrape together money for the first month's rent and a security deposit. And then once I got the apartment, it was empty. I had a crib and a changing table. I had a kitchen table that someone had thrown out. That was it. No bed, no couch, no chairs, no stove, no refrigerator. Luckily, I had Jill, who had some experience, and she told me that I could apply for emergency assistance. So I did. With all the furniture and appliances I'd gotten through emergency assistance, there was one voucher I hadn't used yet. It was for a crib, a second crib for the new baby. The voucher was made out to the Mart, a discount store on Main Street, where they supposedly sold a crib for that price. The welfare office policy was to find the lowest price in town for the particular item, and then issue the voucher in that amount, with a caveat that the recipient could not add any funds to purchase a more expensive item. Obviously, we were incompetent to make our own choices. So this was an attempt to keep store owners from cheating welfare recipients by some bait and switch tactic. Running out of time to get the crib, I went to the Mart, awkwardly holding the glass door open to push Jeremy's stroller through, and walked past the tables where old ladies in zippered house dresses fingered messy stacks of nylon panties. I presented the voucher to a salesman. He was middle-aged, balding, with very pink cheeks, and a tie holding the unbuttoned collar of his short-sleeved dress shirt together. "No," he said, "we don't have a crib for that price." "But you have to," I said. "We don't." He started to walk away. "Hey," I said, and he turned back. "This voucher, the welfare office has you down for selling a crib at this price." He looked down his nose at me, the fluorescent lights gleaming on his forehead, one side of his upper lip curling. "Well, we don't. We used to, but it costs more now." He turned away. I stood there, gripping the metal handle of Jeremy's stroller, not sure what to do. The social worker had been very clear. She was not allowed to change the value of the voucher no matter what. And I couldn't make up the difference, per the caveat on the voucher. All my childhood training back in Roland Park, all those "good little girls don't make a fuss" admonitions came back to me and told me to back down and leave without an argument. I looked around, embarrassed. and hoping none of the other women had overheard our conversation. I thought, well, the baby could sleep in a cardboard box or a bureau drawer. Maybe we could get by until Jeremy no longer needed a crib. Then I heard my friend Melinda's voice in my ear. I don't know about the rest of you. This was something she said when she was organizing the sit-in at the welfare office. But I'm going to the welfare office and not leave until they give me what's right. I stood up a little straighter. Jeremy twisted around to see what I was doing. And then I, the child who'd always hidden in the shadows, slipping into neighbors' yards and hoping no one was looking out of the windows, I raised my voice. So, I said, loud enough that the little old ladies with their tight curls and pastel house dresses looked up. So, you won't sell me a crib at the price you promised. The old ladies started to murmur. So, I said, raising my voice a little more and laying a hand on my 9th-month stomach, you want my baby to have to sleep in a cardboard box? Imagine that, the ladies muttered, dropping the nylon bits they'd been looking through and starting to move closer. Jeremy looked up at the salesman with a scowl. You're a bad man, he said. The man stepped back. He looked to his right and to his left. The store was silent as everyone focused on what he had to say. No, he stumbled. No, of course not. You can have the crib. Of course we'll honor the voucher. I kept my hard look on him as the ladies sighed and turned back to their shopping. Thank you, I said. Now show me where it is. So I learned to speak up when I was on welfare. I learned many things. People often ask me, what did I gain from this experience that I still use today? And certainly learning to speak up for myself is one of them. But the other main thing that I learned was just how generous people could be. Welfare worked for me just the way it was supposed to. It worked for me and everyone I knew. We were on for a little while. It helped us keep body and soul together and helped our kids not starve to death until we could start working again. But so many people were incredibly, incredibly generous with their time and really ready to reach out a hand to help. And that's really one of the main things I learned in this experience was just how helpful people could be. I'm going to read you one more bit. One of the things that surprised me was that even with all my advantages, and I had many advantages that most welfare mothers didn't have and don't have, I still fell prey to that hopelessness, that sense of discouragement. I'll be here forever. I'm never going to get out of this mess. I'm never going to have a job again. And so I spent a lot of time sitting on the stoop in front of the house, just feeling really depressed. So one afternoon while I sat out on the stoop, Jill came over and sat down with me. Dan called. He's renting a rototiller this weekend to put in a garden out at the farm and wondered if we wanted anything dug up while he had it. Well, I said reluctantly, we talked about putting in a garden over there in the empty lot. I didn't want to stand up, much less tackle a garden. All the same, fresh vegetables were an issue. I was a vegetarian, but even without buying meat, I had trouble making the food stamps last. And even though it lasts the month, I tried to include fresh fruit and vegetables, but they were so expensive I usually ended up with the cheapest, like carrots, kale, apples. Bananas were a special treat. Jill nodded. Let's just do the next thing. Get Dan over here. Maybe go out to Spags and get some seeds. I think they have tomato plants on sale this week. So over the next few days, we cleared out trash in the empty lot on the other side of the gray house next door. Then we watched as Dan wrestled the rototiller through the hard ground and weeds. I tried to spell him, but wasn't strong enough to handle it. Instead, Jill and I took turns with a shovel, breaking up the clods and digging in some manure. I don't know, Jill said as we looked at the ground we had prepared. Does it look to you like it's ready? I eyed the rough ground, still choked with big chunks of clay. I think it ought to be finer. Maybe we should have gotten a couple of bags of topsoil. With what money, Jill said. We stood there scratching our heads, not sure what to do next. Jill picked up a seed packet and started reading the planting instructions on the back. Watching us from his front steps was the old man who lived in the gray house between the lot and our house, the one who always wore a long-sleeved shirt buttoned all the way up. When he saw us looking around the empty lot, he got up with a dry little coughing laugh and moving slowly came over to join us. Gaunt, dark-skinned, and tough as gristle, he stepped carefully over the rough ground. "Putting in a garden?" He kicked one of the clods gently. His voice was low and gravelly. "Trying to," I replied. "I had a little truck farm down in Carolina, back in the day." "We aren't sure the ground is ready or if we need to break it up more," I said. "What you need is a hoe." "Well, we have all this stuff." Jill lifted the seed packet she was holding. He tipped his fedora back from his forehead a little. "What you got there? Peas? Too late for them." This was June. Jill and I looked at each other. Turning back to him, she asked, "Would you help us, not to dig or anything, but with advice?" He looked at us impassively. Then a gleam started up in his eyes, and I realized he was smiling, just with his eyes. "Get a hoe," he said, and headed back to his steps. It took a while, but he finally told us his name. Mr. John taught us what we needed to know. He showed us how to use a hoe and explained that we had to be out there using it every day to keep down the weeds and give the plants some air. For ages, it seemed as though nothing was going to happen. The straggly tomato plants adapted to their new home, but the seeds wouldn't come up. I paced the dirt rows looking for any sign of green. Sure that we'd done something wrong, I told Mr. John that I was giving up. I figured I'd go back to sitting on my stoop. "Keep using the hoe," he said. "Do you think the birds ate the seeds? Maybe we started too late." "Takes time," he said, tipping his hat back on his grizzled head. Then suddenly one day there were seedlings, way too many of them, jumbled against each other, beans, squash, peppers, beets, radishes, lettuce. Jill and I ran from row to row, pointing out the spindly green shoots. "Gotta thin 'em," John said. I knelt down and reached to pluck one out. I couldn't do it. "They'll die," I said, looking up at him. His eyes gleamed. "Won't none of 'em thrive if you don't?" And they did thrive, way beyond our expectations. I measured the tiny bean and squash sprouts daily and wielded the hoe the way Mr. John had taught me. Every day I worked in the garden, and instead of exhausting me, it made me feel stronger. The day I pulled up my first beets, I cradled the sweet red bulbs in my hand. Something for nothing, I thought, like loaves and fishes or wine from water, like a baby. Thank you.